thank you so much all for coming along today, especially on this blazing warm evening. It's great to see such a strong turnout to talk about this important issue, the urgent need to make London a sponge city. And we have even more people joining us online. So sustainable urban drainage systems, including rain gardens, support river health by reducing sewage overflow and by filtering out dangerous pollutants contained in road runoff. River health is also promoted by wetlands, particularly large wetlands, in other ways, including slowing the flow through catchments, making river hydrology less aggressive, benefiting local wildlife, and from a climate resilience perspective, they're highly effective at both carbon capture and also providing urban cooling. Thames Water estimates that we need to capture rainwater from 7,000 hectares of land. That means we have to install a huge quantity of wetlands and on-street rain gardens. Recent calls from London to become a sponge city, a concern from the government's chief medical advisor that water quality is now a public health issue, only underline that action is needed right now. It cannot be delayed. Wetlands and rain gardens are part of the solution. Our speakers today will touch on both what is being done and also, crucially, what needs to be done to deliver these nature-based solutions. And now I will hand over to our resident expert, Dave Webb from the Environment Agency, to introduce our speakers. Dave.
Thank you, Anna. I'd just like to thank the CPRE for hosting this year's panel discussion, which is going to be a really fascinating one. But before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. If you do have a mobile phone, please make sure you turn it off. Also, there is no planned fire alarm. So if you do hear a fire alarm, the fire exits are where you came in over there, but also there is another one in that direction where you can go up the stairs and exit the building from the top. So what we're going to do today is some fantastic presentations. After each presentation, there will be an opportunity just to ask any burning questions, but we will then take a short break to enable you to get a quick drink. We'll need to get all the microphones and all the technology, and the second part will be a panel discussion. And I would ask, if you've got any questions, to keep them back for the panel discussion. But I say there is going to be a brief opportunity for questions immediately after each presentation. So as a kind of river and water manager, the holy grail has always been integrated water cycle management. As we know, water is a connector, it's a carrier, and it's a disperser. And if you don't recognize the full functioning of the water cycle, then you're going to have problems. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Alice Roberts, who is a campaigner for the CPRE, who is going to say a few words on why SUDS are so important. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm Alice Roberts. I'm from CPRE. Actually, we're the London branch. We're strangely Campaign to Protect Rural England, London. So I just wanted to say briefly about why we became involved in this agenda. So we lead a coalition which is called the More Natural Capital Coalition. Lots and lots of London organisations with an interest in all kinds of green stuff like biodiversity, water management, and all kinds of other things. And we came together to try to influence mayoral elections and things like that. And about a year ago, we decided that because there are so many issues, we would focus down. And one of the issues we wanted to focus down on was drainage, such as a glamorous subject that it was. So I've been on a bit of a learning curve since then to try to really identify some things with the help of a lot of experts to the people in our coalition to really help me to understand what the problem is specifically and what we can do about it. And when I say that, I mean, what is it about drainage that is causing our rivers to be polluted? Obviously, this is London Rivers Week, and we're here because we're talking about river health. We're not just talking about drainage generally, we're not talking necessarily about flood risk, although it's related. We're talking about drainage, our drainage system, and why it's impacting so badly on our rivers. So I always kind of feel that everybody is now aware of the fact that our rivers are really full of sewage. They know less about other kind of pollutants, but I mean, knowing what we're going to do about it is really the thing that I don't think so many people know about, and maybe some of you in this room do, and some are less well aware of how the system works. So really, what I'm going to do now is take you through my learning journey of the past year, so that you can kind of understand, have the benefit of, I suppose, what I've learned for the last year. So I think that's it for my opening comment. So let's go. Pay attention. There's a lot of slides here. Going to get through it quite quickly. So urbanisation. So what was grey is, what was green is now grey. So that changes the way water flows. Water can no longer soak into the ground. And by the way, you don't have to take notes because it's already online. You can go back and get my presentation immediately when you get home, luckily for you, and the other presentations. So water can't soak into the ground. Instead, it flows off our roofs and off our paved surfaces, such as roads and parking lots. So I just wanted to show you first a picture of London, because London is not every other part of the country. London is quite specific, and we have a lot of rivers. Don't know how many of you know how many rivers we have. Half of them aren't even named on that map. This is a map of a slightly smaller one. I just found these online. I was going to say, if you guys could produce a map of London's rivers in detail, that would be quite cool. And this is, I suppose, a picture of how, it's not a wetland. It's not actually there to filter water, but it is doing a job. It's there and it's holding water. That water isn't going in straight into the drain. So that's just a picture I took in a park. I guess it was in winter, looking at the trees. So this, I suppose, is what I'm talking about by urbanisation. So it's really just literally roads and houses that were built on what was probably agricultural land previously. That's the kind of thing that we've got now. So lots of massive car parks where the water just goes straight into drains. And front gardens, massive problem. So, I mean, estimates reckon that maybe upwards of 70% of front gardens no longer absorbing water have been paved over. That's a picture of 2 front gardens, and one of the things that starts to raise is this issue of, actually, when something is green, it also has biodiversity value. It's not just about the water that's running off. So this map I just wanted to show you because when we talk about numbers, it's really tricky, but a lot of London is green and can absorb water, but it's the bits that are paved over that are the bits that we need to worry about. And even though it's only, well, according to this map, somewhere, so it says 9%, probably too small. It says 9% domestic buildings, 5% non-domestic, 8% other land use, 12% roads. So, whatever that adds up to, and I'm sure that it's not exactly right. 24% domestic gardens, it says, but I guess, again, we don't know how much of those gardens have been paved over or whether it's been built on. So off of those, that proportion of London which is built or paved, it goes either into a road drain or into a house drain. And the house drain might be a sewage drain or it might not be. So Greater London is of about 159,000 hectares. So this is just to try to kind of get you to think about that 7,000 hectare figure that Anna mentioned. And so if we say that roughly 30 to 40% of London is hard surface, and it may be less, it may be more, let's estimate that at something like 55,000 hectares. And so what Thames Water is saying is that we have to take the water, the rainwater runoff, from roughly 7,000 hectares in order to solve our problems. So I'm going to come on to the problems that's creating. One important thing to note is that they've said that this needs to happen by 2050. And I think that having talked to lots of people, most people believe that that needs to happen much sooner than that. So why do we need to capture rainwater on such a huge scale? I mean, part of it is about flood risk, but today we're here to talk about rivers. So we're here to talk about why rainwater runoff has led to catastrophic levels of pollution in our rivers, and importantly, to learn about why becoming a sponge city is key to solving some of those problems. Well, both flooding and pollution, and some other problems too. So, some exciting maps for you. How many people know that London is divided into kind of drainage areas, and this is where your sewage goes to? So this is a map that I thought was quite interesting. I'd never seen it before. So for instance, if you're in Beckton, that's most of north central London and quite a lot of East London, your sewage goes to Beckton Sewage Works, which is just at the mouth of the River Roding in East London. And I've put the reference for this document at the bottom so that if you want to go back, a lot of these maps that I'm about to show you are on this document, and you can go back to it. And this is a Thames Water document, I should stress, and obviously you can look at more of the detail there. So that's broadly how our sewage works. So if you're in one area, your sewage will go to a particular sewage treatment works. This is from the same document. It's the flow capacity of London sewers. So orange or red indicates capacity constraints. So that means too much going into them, they can't cope. And this map is about sewage treatment capacity. So if you can see the little pillars sticking up, those are, if they're red or orange, it means that they're modeling essentially how much sewage can go into them. And if there's not enough treatment capacity, so the red ones, it says before 2025. I mean, so it's just astonishing, really. That's most of them. And then the rest of them are orange, which is 2025 to 2034. So sewage pollution essentially is about too much water entering the drains. So if we have more heavy rainfall events, in certain parts of London, that combines with the sewers. So this is not, I'm going to explain why in a moment. This doesn't happen in all of London. So in inner London, you have a problem which is called combined sewer overflow. So when there's too much rain, the way that you stop flooding or stop stop sewage backing up into people's houses is it just overflows straight into the rivers. So that's legal to a point, but since it's not, it's become something which water companies monitor themselves and is not monitored by the Environment Agency, and a lot of these sewage overflows are not monitored even. So that's essentially what's going on there. But I should stress that misconnections are also a massive problem. So this is just when somebody's built a house maybe and connected the sewage to the water drainage, to the rainwater drainage pipe, which then goes straight into the river. Misconnections happen in a number of ways, but essentially they're quite hard to find, quite often quite hard to find. And I know there are people in here who can tell you more about that. So the rainwater and sewage combined drain is not a problem everywhere, but it is a big problem. So the other massive source of pollution is road runoff. So if you've got high levels of road runoff pollution, that's coming off roads, I'll come on to that, and also causes other problems. Having too much water causes fast water flow, and impacts river ecology. So the combined sewage overflow, and I've just mentioned this one, so I'm going to skip past this. Sorry, I did that on the last slide. This map is really important because, and I took this from So there's an organisation called London Waterkeeper, and they're on Twitter, but they're also on the internet, and you can look at this. Again, I've put the reference at the top. If you look at that, you see, perhaps surprisingly, that in inner London, that's where the combined sewer area is. But actually, in the rest of London, they're not combined. That means that the road drains, the rainwater drains, go straight into the river. So I suppose if you're really, in one way that might be good, because that rainwater is not going into not combining with the sewage and causing overflows. But in another way, that's very bad, because it takes with it all kinds of awful pollution. But you need to remember this map, because a lot of people think that the combined sewage overflow problem is everywhere, but it's actually not. And there are different problems in different areas, and there are different capacity constraints in different areas, like that map I showed you before with the red and the orange and yellow. So this is a map of combined sewer overflow. So the Victorians, and this is me quoting London Waterkeeper, the Victorians didn't build sewers for rain. They built the sewers for sewage. And London at that time was very porous. So not much rain reached the sewers. So they didn't have to build them for rainwater. So what you see on the right is the sewage overflows. So they're monitored, and this is the monitoring. This is the ones that are monitored. And this shows that on the 20th of February, I can't remember if this was this year or last year. I think it was actually last year, this graph of this picture. Very few. But on the 30th of June, there'd been lots and lots of rain, and there were lots of overflows. So this is what I've said. So what London Waterkeeper said in this tweet was Thames Water should have invested in stopping the rain reaching the sewers, of course. Ofwat should have made that happen. The government should have enacted, this is a technical point which we can come on to if we want to. So road runoff pollution, again, I've said road rainwater. The only thing I really want to say about this is that, I can't stress how much stuff there is coming off the road into the water. Oil and heavy metals from vehicles, microplastics from tires or road markings, and chemicals washed off industrial estates as well. So every river in London fails water quality standards because of this problem. So I'm not going to talk about responsibility, but I hope we will come back to it in the questions. But one thing I did want to point out is that although there's a complex set of responsibilities with Thames Water, Ofwat, the Environment Agency and so forth, that actually 95% of London's roads are managed by the boroughs. And all of us use and manage water, and we can all actually take action if there's an incentive to do so. So Sponge City is where we stop all the water going down the drain, basically. And we can do that in a number of different ways. So I'm going to briefly cover some of these. So rain gardens, wetlands, which is what we're going to hear about in much more detail after me. So these capture and retain water and absorb it, and also they filter it. And something called a SUDS planter can also help. So they slow the flow through river catchments. Particularly large wetlands do that, and they make river hydrology less aggressive, and that benefits the ecology. And they also provide many other benefits unrelated to river health. So if you create lots of SUDS in cities, you have less flooding, more habitat for nature, you have nicer streets, and it contributes to urban cooling. So those are I'm going to try to finish now, rain gardens. So those are those things you see popping up in the street. Those are engineered to take water. They're not just like a garden, they're engineered properly to adapt to hold water. This is a planter, similar thing, it holds water, but it's a planter rather than engineered into the ground. These are front gardens which have been engineered to absorb water rather than water running straight off. And critically, of course, wetlands, which is what we're going to hear about now. And I just put this slide in for people to read later because London Wildlife Trusts have had a project, and Matthew Frith, who was going to be here today, couldn't be here, so he sent me this. So this is about all the things, all the benefits that SUDS bring, sustainable urban drainage systems. Some references for you for if you'd like to go back and look at some of this. And that's my parklet outside my house, which is just one small contribution to this big problem. And that's it. So I hope that.
Lovely photos. I just love that. So does anyone have any burning questions for Alice before we move on? No? Fantastic. So there'll be lots of opportunity. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions.
Somebody just.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. Just a very quick one. I'm curious to know about how the 70,000 hectares is derived versus the figure here. What's the sort of calculation?
It was a Thames water calculation.
Thames water.
In terms of sewage surcharge, so preventing their sewers from flooding people's houses is what my understanding of it.
Yeah, I think you can do runoff calculations dependent on the basic landscape. So a runoff calculation of a concrete would be much faster than the runoff on a piece of field, for instance. And I think you can use that to identify the deficit or how much extra area of grass to slow down you need. So it's some really complex mathematics behind it.
Well, I think the 7,000 is there to kind of try to give people a feel for the scale of what's needed, but actually there's much more nuance and where it needs to be is really important.
Well, fantastic. So that's a fantastic, I think they call it a segue actually, because I'm very pleased to introduce John Bryden, who has been involved in improving rivers across London for many years, and head of rivers improvement for Thames 21, who do some fantastic work both in river restoration but also wetland creation for a whole variety of purposes, flood risk management, water quality, and of course wildlife. And one of the critical things about all of this in terms of planning is the ability for a piece of wetland to deliver a function is very much dependent on its locality. And I think, John, you're going to say a little bit about some planning and tools to ensure we get the most out of the wetlands. Thank you, John.
Thank you for that, Dave. So yeah, Dave's given me a really good introduction of my background. I think I've been working on London's rivers for about 17 or 18 years, similar to Joe over here, initially at the EA before moving to Thames 21 10 years ago. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is road runoff pollution, and there's a great photo of a road runoff pollution event there on the left, which South East Rivers Trust took through some of their projects, and you can really see the black sediment which is coming out of that outfall, and that contains over 300 different forms of pollutants, some of which we know quite a lot about, some of which we really don't understand very well. And in America, they've even found that they are starting to prevent salmonid species breeding over there from one chemical or one set of chemicals which they've just found. The real issue with some of these is they bioaccumulate, so they will stay there and sit in the riverbed for decades, and particularly the heavy metals of those can prevent aquatic life from breeding. So essentially, where this does bioaccumulate to really significant effects, it essentially can prevent aquatic life, and that is the case in some of our rivers in particularly North London. So road runoff is, generated by the activity of the car, similar to air quality pollution. So, it's from the brakes, tyres, car body exhaust, and also the degradation of the road. So, yeah, it's a really complex tool. It's a really complex pollution issue. And so what we've tried to do is break it down into something which is a bit more understandable into solutions. So hopefully this link will open. It's, I can see it on my screen. Alice, do you know which one? So what we've done is we've basically used a traffic model and done a series of calculations which are then integrated into a map, and we've looked at the various pollution solutions, so road runoff, SUDS. Let's see if I can get this to...
Kind of approaching the corner of the screen. Hold on, we just need to leave it.
Wonders of IT. So yeah. Okay. So this is a map of London, and so you can click on here a local authority. So I'll go to Barnet. You can see the various roads which have been identified as high, moderate, low priority. And so this was based off a TfL traffic model. And then you can see the different forms of pollutants that we've just looked at 5 here as an understanding of the 300 odd pollutants. And if you scroll down, you can click where the pollution enters the river and also the drainage area of those. And one thing I would say, this is based on Thames Water's mapping of the sewer catchments in London, which is quite poor relatively. So it's an understanding of that. It could be better, so because it really depends on the input data. Then if we look at the solutions, you can click here to look at the parks where wetlands have been identified as a pollution source, and that this shows the surface water drains which are, you know, going through those parks, which could be broken out into a wetland. And then if you zoom to a high priority road, you can then click on that, and you can see up here the different SUDS which are available, which can be used to treat the pollution at that road. So and so this is, it's really important to say this is a decision support tool. It's not a design tool, but it gives local authorities or community groups an understanding of what sort of SUD could resolve the pollution on there. So I'll try and get this off. So yeah, this was a quote which Sadiq Khan provided us for when we produced this tool, and so he's behind it, and we hope to see that he'll be able to amplify it in this mayoral term and actually sort of begin to see many of these solutions implemented through programs which either TfL runs or the various support he provides to the boroughs. And what we want to see is this work delivered at scale, because it's not a single solution which will be able to start to resolve this pollution, but, you know, getting towards that 7,000 hectares that we need to do. So moving quickly on to constructed wetlands, we've been involved and supported delivery of a number of them. I think Enfield Council are the furthest ahead out of all local authorities in London. They've probably delivered about 10 of these systems. We have done some monitoring, but in actual fact, what we've done here is looked at some water quality modelling. We did this with Oxford University a number of years ago, and what it's showing is the water quality in the blue is what is predicted now from their water quality models, and the ones in the orange actually show water quality getting down to what we see as good status from the in terms of the Environment Agency reference, and that's looking at around 30 wetlands throughout 2 small catchments in North London. So it sort of shows that these systems, if they're delivered in enough numbers and actually at the right locations, we can get good, healthy rivers in London, which, you know, was quite something for me when we found that out. I also came across this recently. So this is something I've only heard about in the last couple of weeks. And this is a tool which the Rivers Trust, Thames 21 is part of the Rivers Trust network, and they have developing a tool, and this actually has support of Natural England, and that's probably key as a regulatory body. And so they probably developed it for nutrient neutrality areas, and it's a Thames largely in the Thames Basin, it's not a neutrality area, but it's actually a bit of guidance here where you can input data to actually size your wetland appropriately or see if a wetland is large enough to treat the pollution. So it's quite a simple input, and trying to take that complex science into something which is useful and understandable for a lot of us who aren't just the high-end scientists. Another thing that I've recently been coming across, and so my first private sector funding for a wetland was probably 7-8 years ago, and it was funding from Coca-Cola, and I was really shocked that they would invest in wetlands to improve water quality. And in recent years, I've been sort of seeing this sector grow massively. And so water stewardship is becoming a much bigger thing from companies, and where they are actually starting to invest money at scale, which can start to deliver nature-based solutions to improve our rivers. So we've had funding from these companies, and there's probably a few others out there who don't want to be named, but this is a system which has been come up with, and there is actually an organisation called Alliance for Water Stewardship who sort of oversee this approach, where essentially companies are using water. They have to try and reduce that, because we are also, particularly in the southeast of the UK, in a massively water stressed area. So they try to reduce it as much as possible, and then they offset it. So we are always looking to deliver water quality improvements through that offset. So really, if they need 10,000 cubic meters of water to produce their products, then they improve the water quality for 10,000 cubic meters of water a year in our rivers. So this is something we've seen growing and growing, and it's to the point where we're actually struggling to keep up with that demand. And some of these companies are continuing to invest quite significant sums of money into delivering healthy rivers. So that's something that I always think we need to be thinking about in terms of how we, in terms of the community, but also in terms of local authorities, how we can actually put together our different forms of finance to actually enable these guys to really come in and pay for a lot of the capital works to deliver our healthy rivers. And this is a photo of the first wetland which I worked on, which Coca-Cola ended up putting some money into to deliver healthy rivers. And so this is in Broomfield Park in Enfield. The Friends of Broomfield Park were really involved. We went around and worked with them to identify the site. And funnily enough, they had thought about putting a pond there previously, but it was a bit too big for them. So that's what we could do. And, the local authority, really great there. They're quite well known for doing some brilliant work. They put a bit of money in for the flood risk benefits, because also protects houses just downstream from there from being flooded as well. So I think these are the sort of projects which really deliver some biodiversity improvement. Joe will talk about that a bit more shortly, but also, make our rivers more resilient to pollution and resilient to climate as well. Thank you.
Any questions for John? I have a question.
How deep is the water?
Yes. Yeah.
So the depth is designed to be a variety of ranges. You want the first wetland cell to be deeper, so it collects a lot of that sediment, because you saw that photo from the road runoff pollution. There can be a lot of sediment which goes into these, and you don't want it to clog up too quickly. And then there will be a range of levels within that. But Joe's got a lovely design guide which can support people to help develop them.
I was thinking about kids throwing themselves on the ground.
Well, that is something you have to do as part of the design process. And so if we often plant them up with quite dense reeds, so it doesn't look like that anymore. It's really thick with reeds, so there's not that much. There's a barrier essentially for that sort of event. We haven't had one yet.
Thank you. I think I have a question there.
The water quality offset type thing, is that a regulated market? And is it location specific?
It's a voluntary market.
Yeah. what's the product that, is it contained in a product, like kind of certificate?
Yeah, so there's a body, Alliance for Water Stewardship, which is worthwhile. Like, it's quite a complicated accreditation process. This one was probably done in a much more simplified version, but there is a set way to go out and calculate it. I would say voluntary markets can deliver much quicker than regulated markets. It's my experience at the moment. So wherever they abstract from, it should be delivered within that same area.
Ponds that are lovely when they've got water in. Do you line them with something to retain water? Ponds look lovely when they've got water in. Do you have a lining to retain water through the summer?
No, we try to prevent that, because what we actually want to do is them to recharge the local aquifer. So in actual fact, them percolating into the ground is a really good thing. However, I would say that we're on clay a lot of the time, particularly in North London. So we've not had one dry out yet. And if they are, they're probably more designed to dry out, like swales and rain gardens.
Okay, just one more. So yeah.
There was the mention about getting like capital from like the business sector, basically, to support some of these projects. Is there a reason why that capital can't be used to help the leaky drains that Thames Water is struggling to pay?
Well, that's probably a wider question, but I would say that Thames Water need to be fixing their own assets, and we shouldn't be.
So it's because it's their problem.
Yeah.
Right.
That would be my personal opinion.
And that's because they're a private company.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, John. That was excellent. Because one of the big things, we just need more investment, and one of the critical things about getting investment is confidence that it's going to deliver what we hope it's going to deliver through placement and good design. So I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce Joe Pecorelli, who is the Freshwater Conservation Manager for Zoological Society for London, who's done some outstanding work, both in terms of wetland, but generally some great species work as well. So a big hand for Joe.
Thanks, Dave. It's impressive turnout for an event on SUDS on a hot evening. It's amazing. Great, thank you very much. Yes, so I hope I'm not going to burst the bubble, but I'm going to temper enthusiasm perhaps, and we're going to turn full circle. We're going to look at the limitations perhaps of nature-based solutions in an urban environment. I'm going to do that through presenting a case study. A really impressive project that was spearheaded by London Borough of Harrow and funded in the old school way, grant funded through the National Lottery and GLA rewilding funding. With that money, they built this wetland, and the local imperative to build the wetland was, as John said, wetlands, if they're designed correctly, they'll store sediment, and it's a place for you can then take that sediment away. And that was exactly the function of this wetland. It was to stop the silt that was formerly clogging up the listed Headstone Manor moat. That was the real driver there. But Headstone Manor, I don't know whether you know this, but that's considered to be the source of the River Crane. And so the Zoological Society were commissioned to look at the impact on nature and water quality of this wetland as part of a work across the whole catchment. That's what it looks like in the design. It's a beautiful place now for local residents to enjoy. There are people in that shot, see if you can see them, surrounded by meadows and lush reed beds through the summer months. And you know, as Alice talked about, there's many benefits of building wetlands like this. For nature, they improve water quality, they create habitats, they control silt, we've talked about, they regulate flows, we've talked about aggressive hydrological regimes. That essentially means often our rivers in London are squashed, they're incised, and if they're very flashy, juvenile fish, for instance, get washed through the system. There's no refuges for them. So we need to slow those flows through our rivers, and wetlands are a great way of doing that. And for people, of course, they provide flood storage, cooling in a warming climate, and well-being and access to nature. So what do we do when we investigated water quality? We worked with the local volunteers, the Headstone Manor Park friends, and we did spot sampling. So that's essentially taking samples from the inlet and the outlet of the wetlands and sending the samples off to a lab. And we analysed those for multiple different determinants, including some of the ones that John mentioned, heavy metals and hydrocarbons. But if we just look at phosphate, you can see in this data point is doing what the wetlands, what we expected the wetland to be doing. So from the inlet, the light green, to the outlet, the phosphate is reducing some 20%. And in fact, other wetlands, so one Furze Farm wetland that was investigated by Thames 21 showed a 70% reduction across the wetland. They can be enormously effective at removing nutrients like phosphate. We also use more sophisticated bits of kit to find out about the water quality impacts. And these are really illuminating. So the image there, the sensors, you can get all sorts of parameters, dissolved oxygen, ammonia, pH. But the really clever thing is they're called SONs, and they send data up to a web-based platform. So might need to interpret this, but that's the inlet ammonia. So ammonium, as I'm sure you know, is from sewage, essentially, from our sewers. And you can see through the early part of the study, I should say the study took place through 2022. We had 2 months of SONS investigations. Through the early part of 2022, you can see that the wetland was performing as it should do. In other words, the ammonia was decreasing across the wetland. And you can see also the impact of rain. So this is called the first flush effect, the fact that we haven't talked about. And it's a really important function of SUDS is to prevent material from being washed into, organic material from being washed into rivers. And when that happens, you get these spikes of ammonia. You see that? That's high. That's damagingly high. And of course, as that material goes through, it affects the oxygen. We're going to look at that. But this is the way wetlands improve water quality. So they uptake nutrients through plant growth. They slow the flow and expose water to UV radiation when the sun comes out. And that destroys pathogens and starts various chemical breakdown processes. Sedimentation we've talked about, some 75% or so of road runoff pollutants are bound with silt, and the silts themselves in excess are polluting to rivers. And then microbial action throughout the wetland breaks down chemicals. But as John said, there's certain, particularly hydrocarbons and metals, that are persistent in the environment and do not get broken down. So that was the water quality side of things, just a real snapshot. In terms of nature, you know, we all know that over the last 300-400 years, we've lost about 3/4 of wetlands from across the UK, and yet they're vital for biodiversity. They support 40% or so of the world's species are reliant on wetlands. They can be disproportionately biodiverse if they're in good condition. And we use the main metric we use is the invertebrates in the wetland to give us an indication of the health of that environment for wildlife. And we wanted to do that in a way that that brought the local community, the volunteers from Headstone Park along with us. So we monitored again the inlet and the outlet, and we use a simple way of deriving a score from the number and abundance of invertebrates. And you can see the wetland here is functioning as it should. The inlet with more polluted water has fewer invertebrates, and conversely the outlet, the invertebrate populations increase. And that was the case. We're going to come back to this event, which I'm sure because you're also forensic wetland experts now, you can all decipher that what happened at the end of July, the rain event, so this is oxygen we're looking at here, I hope you can hear me, and this is normal pattern for oxygen. It's high in the day when plants are photosynthesizing and producing oxygen, comes down at night when they're respiring. And this is a rain event, the blue lines, and that first flush phenomenon happens, and you can see the oxygen flatlines. The wetland died. And now there might be a number of factors causing this. It was a relatively new wetland. If you remember 2022, it was a long, hot summer, but it's an important lesson. And you didn't really need that sophisticated piece of kit to show you the abuse this wetland was receiving. So this is downstream of the surface water network underneath Harrow, and fats from restaurants or whatever are spilling into it. Nuisance algae are proliferating, showing us that the river is, the wetland is over enriched. And when it collapses, it becomes a source of pollution to rivers and not part of the solution. So really what we need, as long as with our sponge city, and you talked about this, Alice, is to work, it's not just nature, but we cannot just rely on nature. We cannot abuse nature and expect it to solve the problems that we're creating. We have to install these studs alongside a vastly scaled up program of removing pollution at source. And when we think about roads, that might be technical fixes that John talked about and has been working on. And when we think about sewers, it's not just CSOs, combined sewer overflows, which are now being regulated, albeit disappointingly ineffectively, yes. There's all sorts of other sources or ways foul water gets into our rivers. Failing assets, misconnections we've mentioned, block sewers, so essentially sewer abuse, fats going in, and they all result in pollution coming out at outfalls throughout London. And just to go back to the headstone story, we carried on through 2023 monitoring our invertebrates, and you can see that it did function as you would expect through last year. And this year, because wetlands are being seen as part of the solution, they are part of the solution, they're being built all over with Thames 21 and others, we're rolling out this monitoring method because it's vital that we understand whether wetlands can tolerate the levels of pollution we're subjecting them to. And also in terms of the sources where pollution is entering our rivers via our struggling sewer network, we run, every river in London is surveyed on a 4-year rotation through the Outfall Safari programme. And we deliver that in partnership with community groups all over London. We've got volunteers out now. Anyone been involved in one of those? Show of hands? No one. Yes. Well done. Well done. Excellent. Yeah. So you can sign up to do that, to survey a river, and we report all the data to Thames Water. We might talk about what happens with it later. Just the documents I've talked about, the Wetland Design Guide, there's a few hard copies, but that talks about the things that John was talking about, how you design a constructed wetland for pollution remediation. And then if you want a lot more information on the study on headstone wetlands, there's a report available on the Crane Valley Partnership website. So thanks very much for listening.
That was brilliant. And I think it shows how important it is actually, when looking at these solutions, you do need a network to have a resilient solution. Has anyone got any?
Just after your wetland died, then what was your path forward from that?
Sorry, repeat the question, please.
You mentioned after that first flush, your wetland was so polluted that it died, and I was just wondering when that happened and what your steps forward since then have been to restore it, or are you just giving up? Or
yeah, I just gave up. No, no. Well, the weather helped us. So basically, what happened is we couldn't. there was nothing we could do. It failed in summer when temperatures were very high, and in high temperature you get less oxygen in the water. So there's a number of factors involved in causing the death of the wetland. So basically, as it came through into autumn, the invertebrates started to return, and now you can see that we carried on monitoring it, and it's functioning as it should in terms of, you know, as coarsely as we can see through checking invertebrates. So it did recover, but it's not helpful if every nature-based solution fails in summer and starts being a source of pollution. You know, that's the point.
Was the mechanism of failure that there was, I guess that thing is supposed to slow down the river flow and silt, and then there was a big rain and it washed lots of pollutants into the wetland itself?
Yeah.
Which is the same mechanism that pollutes the rivers themselves downstream.
Exactly that, yeah.
So like, is there a way that you can run it as a more dynamic thing, like maybe have the wetland in parallel to this flow of the river instead of in the theory?
Yeah, to sort of divert the most polluting slug of water. I mean,
in extreme events.
yeah, I mean, either way, you end up compromising the river or the wetland and defeating the purpose of building them. And I think, yeah, your thinking is good, but I hope that, you know, the point is that we can't just rely on nature to deal with these problems. We have to upscale investment into stopping the pollution getting into them. Otherwise, we've got dead rivers and dead wetlands.
If you treat a wetland as a sort of hands-off asset.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they can be built as a hands-off asset. You know, so the design guide talks about this, and John talked about it as well. You know, in an urban area, you've got a sacrificial cell, your receptor cell for a wetland, and that accumulates sediment that will be full of horrible chemicals. You know, there's 300 different chemicals from road runoff, metals, hydrocarbons. Some of them are dangerous to us. So they can't be built and just left. That will have to be removed. Some of those chemicals have to be processed out. You know, it becomes contaminated waste. So, yeah,
Sorry,
it's
just
not
to
so
say,
easy.
Can all questioners use the microphone, because otherwise it's not being picked up on the live stream?
Okay. So if we have our last question, gentleman here.
Well, I'll be quick. Specifically, what can house owners do to reduce pollution, and how effective would these measures be compared with larger scale ones by local authority or national government?
What can we do to reduce pollution? Well, what can we do to reduce pollution? We haven't, for about 35 years, there hasn't been a long-term plan to invest in our sewer infrastructure. So just in the last few years, the water companies have been obliged to produce drainage wastewater management plans. It's going to get really juicy now. And these are 25-year plans. They're non-statutory at the moment, but the idea is they become statutory. But the fact that we're 35 years in and now we're just thinking, well, we need to build in resilience to our sewer infrastructure, just shows you how difficult thinking has been going on in our water sector. So that's what we need. We need a long-term plan to invest in our sewer network, so that the sewers are linked to the surface water network through a number of ways and a number of failures, and that will help. And then we have to resolve the capacity problems as well as part of that plan that Alice talked about.
Yeah, I think so. There isn't a simple one solution. It's actually, I think there's multiple approaches, but the important thing is getting them all to work as one cohesive approach. Okay, so I don't know if anyone, people want to take a very quick break, or if people are happy just to continue, we're happy just to continue. So does anyone want to start need a drink or anything? I say what, let's crack on, because I've got some start our panel break. So yeah, this is really for the whole panel. So if you could just, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and the drill guide the microphone in your direction. And so if you just like to say if it is directed to an individual, or are we looking at all the panel to answer? So yeah, let's go for it. So lady here.
Thank you. So I live in North London near the River Moselle. The River Moselle is really heavily polluted, mostly due to misconnections. And recently I was walking by a White Hart Lane where the river is culverted. I think 2/3 of the Moselle are culverted anyway. And there was a rain garden I noticed that must have been built a few years ago, but not, I think fairly recently, and a lovely information board where it's explained that the problem is misconnections. It's a big problem to solve. Meanwhile, have the rain garden. So it just feels like this solution, as much as I understand they can contribute to solving the problem, I wonder whether it's a small contribution and it might be used as a pacifier until the council or Thames Water, whoever is responsible, buys even more time. So I feel there is a risk that this is how this solution may be used. It's not a lot of a question, but if you could tell me what you think. Thank you.
I think I'm going to leave this one to John.
Oh, okay.
I can add my own thoughts.
So the Moselle Brook has got a long and horrible history of pollution, and it sort of goes back way into Haringey Council, and there was actually a whole school which was completely misconnected, and that essentially put, you know, all the effluent from the school into the river, and it took probably a decade to get that resolved. And because of that, then Thames Water couldn't really identify the other misconnections. That's what they're going through at the moment to try and resolve some of the misconnection issues within the Moselle Brook. I would say that it's, you know, as Joe was saying, it's not a single solution is going to do something. It has to be a complete mixed asset world. You know, it might only feel like a SUD, which is the start, but you've got to start somewhere. And then you've got to try and deliver it at scale. So, you know, Alice was saying we need 7,000 hectares of SUDS, which is a huge number. And, you know, we need to be taking every single chance to deliver these solutions. Because, you know, they're not just resolving pollution or helping to resolve pollution. They're, you know, providing some small scale biodiversity on that roadside. They're improving air quality. They're reducing flood risk. They're reducing heat island effect, and it's those multi-benefits which we need to sort of champion, as well as not just the single pollution issue. And part of the reason we produced that road runoff tool was not because we feel that that will directly relate to deliver water quality improvements, but it's really informing local authorities and empowering them with knowledge to be able to actually go and deliver as part of a vast array of different mechanisms. And the stuff around Tottenham is a great example of that, because that wasn't delivered with any water quality funding. That was delivered with regen funding. And those are the sorts of mechanisms. Every time a street is dug up, we need to deliver a SUD. Every time, you know, Cadent Gas go in there and build a new or redo the pipe, we need to build another SUD. And that's where we need to move towards, as opposed to thinking these are water quality issues we need to solve on our own. That we need to empower others to do it.
Hi, well, firstly, thank you. I learned a lot, so I've really enjoyed the session. You mentioned that you had, I think, mayoral support, the Lord Mayor supported what you were trying to do. But my question is, does the Lord Mayor and the office support sufficiently? And overall in London, where are we in terms of local council support and borough support, and how how much work do we need to be doing in terms of policy development with them? I might just say about a couple of things, and I'm sure we've all got loads to say on this, but I mean, I think there's a mountain to climb here, and local authorities have no money. So, you know, some people are suggesting that we might have to write off local authorities' debts in order for them to be able to do anything. And obviously they have many priorities. That said, there are boroughs which are managing to build SUDS. So, you know, so we shouldn't just say, oh, it's a disaster, no one can do anything. I think that there is a lot of potential for money to be brought into this via things like insurance and other mechanisms. But we have to find it, we have to make that work. So we have to have the, well, this is what we need to do. And this is where the money's going to come from. And that's a very big plan. But that's kind of where we're working towards, I suppose.
Yeah, I think to add to that, like we worked together as part of the More Natural Capital Coalition and looked at sort of how we could begin to deliver at scale. And so, and I know the GLA is working on this, but we sort of figured that in actual fact, if you had, there's roughly like 10 catchments in London. If you had about 5 officers working in each catchment for 5 years, you could start to deliver at scale. And that would cost about 30 million, I think we worked out, into sort of whatever today's prices are. So it's not an insignificant amount of money, but it is something we can look towards to start to bring those sort of skill sets and that capacity into just developing, designing and delivering those sorts of solutions. So that 30 million is without capital from what I remember. So the capital is on top of that. But yeah, that's what we need to do. Do you want to?
And of course, we have Thames Water going into administration at exactly the wrong moment, or what we think is administration, and a political decision likely to be waiting till after the election to decide how we're going to fund this. So it's, yeah, it's not an ideal time to be trying to resolve this.
Yeah, I would say that it's not just about money. And in terms of your question, you know, how much support is the mayor? They're just going through, they're producing a surface water strategy for London. Currently, it's going to go out for consultation soon. And we're working, so the River Partnerships of London, which is a collaboration of organisations, are hopefully going to form a partnership with the GLA to support rivers, and the mayor wants to make them swimmable. That's good luck with the very shallow ones. But anyway, yeah, it's not, I don't think it's just about money. You know, Alice started this session talking about paved over front gardens, you know, 50%, 70% gone. The rate is increasing. Those are personal decisions that people are taking. So I think, you know, there's social problems. There's, yes, cash is perhaps is also obviously nice and is needed, but there is money for this sort of work, and there's institutional inertia. There's some local authorities that are really trailblazing this. John's works a lot with Enfield. They are amazing, and if they can do it, it's down to individuals really who are pushing it. So yeah, I don't think it's just about money. Yeah, that probably wasn't your question, but.
Thanks. Paul from the Craggy Waterways Action Group. So I'm going to ask Alice precisely about that point. So a bit of preamble. Front gardens is something that we've been working on quite a lot. And one of the references you had on one of your slides, Alice, was the London National Park City Front Gardens project, which is well worth looking at. So London National Park City Front Gardens, you'll find it. And Christine from Ealing has done all the pioneering work, but I've been helping her. But we've been opening up this debate about the loss of front gardens and how actually that undermines all the other good work that's been potentially being done. But it's like no one wants to own it, you know, because it's private space in theory. But if you're trying to green your street, and you're still getting road runoff or road runoff from a front garden that's been paved over, often within 24 hours, then you're on a hiding to nothing. So we're looking to do some work with one particular borough in particular to try and get others on board to look at a financial system to make it attractive to persuade people to reconvert their gardens using Thames water metrics to make it financially viable. If we could chunk that up and make it something the Mayor of London got behind, we could spread it out across the whole capital and make it viable as a product. But I wondered if, Alice, you would say a bit more about the work around front gardens, and because it does feel like it's an overlooked problem. Thanks.
And give this guy the mic quickly, then I'll talk about it.
Just a quick add-on to that point or question. Is it the same to have a water butt that captures roof runoff than to have a garden that's got flowers, given that people may not be interested in, landlords may not be interested in gardening?
Okay, so front gardens are usually converted to park cars. So one of the other things that we have to do in London is dramatically reduce the amount of traffic, and that's related to climate goals, air quality goals, and a whole load of other problems like road death and injury, and I could go on. So one of the big problems that's happening at the moment is, although we're moving in theory to electric cars, that means people want to park their car in their front garden, which means that they want to convert for front gardens. The problem is that the government legislated some years ago to say that it's permitted development. You don't have to apply for planning permission to convert your front garden for parking. You just have to apply to the council to put in what's called a pavement crossover. So that's where you see the drop curb, the driveway, if you like. So it's basically something that is very hard to do anything about unless they remove that legislation. So I think that what we want to do is to kind of join with London National Park City, and we're working with Christine, who's the Front Gardens project in Ealing, sorry, and to do a number of things. And one is to appeal to householders. You can actually make a front garden which has parking in it, which actually absorbs water. A lot of surfaces which are sold as permeable are not, so you have to be a bit careful, but you can do that, and you can still have, in fact, she's literally just been doing a bit of work on how many bits of flora and fauna she could find in a permeable surface. So this goes back to your question about water butts, or whether it's a water butt or whether it's a SUDS or whether it's actually she's already found, like in matrix paving, which might look like nothing for biodiversity, she's already found 30 different species. So it does make a difference if it's just a water butt or if it's just a planter. And actually, front gardens with soil and soft landscaping and plants is actually what we need. But if you can't do that for whatever reason, then the next best is either to put in a SUDS planter, if you can, which takes rainwater from the roof, and to somehow capture the runoff from your drive and filter that, or put in a water butt, because anything that you stop going in the drains will stop adding to that problem. And if you collectively do that across a lot of houses, that could be a lot of water, providing, I suppose, you empty your water butt and don't just wait for the next rainfall.
I don't know, because I don't have a car, but I've been given to understand that if you can park your car in your garden, you get a reduced insurance premium. Now, as I say, I don't have a car, so I don't know if that's true, but that's something you might investigate. And I'll just say quickly, no one's mentioned carbon storage. Wetlands store carbon, and yeah.
I think your flood insurance might go up. Your car insurance might go down.
Thanks very much. My name is Phil. I'm a mature student looking at sustainable cities. And this module, we've been looking at two enormous critical infrastructure projects, the Thames Tideway Tunnel and the next generation of Thames Barrier, both multi-billion-pound massive geoengineering schemes. I don't think either
had a huge amount of nature-based solutions put in them, or there was much debate until it was too late, I think, in question of the tunnel. So my question was really about scale. Obviously, we can't look back, but I was wondering, looking forward, is it conceivable that what the three of you have been talking about, if that was done at a large enough scale, could become such a large asset that it could become a significant investment that could be made instead of, or maybe to supplement, a major geoengineering project? Thank you.
I just actually, before, that's a great question, but before I just want to come back on the comment about we're not mentioning carbon storage of wetlands. Actually, unfortunately, for wetlands built as nature-based solutions, the jury's out on their carbon balance because they produce methane. There's lots of anaerobic processes going on, processes without oxygen that produce, greenhouse gases. So, it's not simple in that respect. I remember the initial conversations about to have the tideway or not to have the tideway, and the great promise was that it was both. You know, it's not just a single concrete solution. We need SUDS too, and somehow the SUDS has just disappeared off the radar. And yes, we do need both. And I think what I was trying to say is that yes, we need nature-based solutions, but we also need to fix our dilapidated sewer infrastructure. Same thing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the reason why tideway was needed as a big concrete pipe, if you're looking to deliver the sort of protection that it is because essentially, central London used to be a whole series of rivers. And essentially, if we just put water into the ground, they would flow more. So, the Fleet, the Tyburn, all of those. So that was the only technical solution. The Thames barrier, that's because of, sea level rise. So, there's not really a nature-based solution as far as I understand to that. Although you could do bits and pieces with, flooding, estuaries, marshes and that. Don't know if you want to say something about that.
Step back.
Yeah.
I think we're going off track.
Yeah, and just to go off track a bit more, the entire Thames estuary is basically one big landfill site, so I wouldn't fancy flooding that. Cause a mass pollution event.
I was just wondering what has to happen with all the polluted sediment that's gathered at the bottom of the SUDS. You said sediment will gather at the bottom. I just wondered what has to happen about that.
So that probably needs to change for, because we've talked about a number of different sorts of interventions. With the constructed wetlands, essentially you'll have to dredge that periodically to remove it so it doesn't discharge into the river. And depending on the level of contaminants within that, which depends on what is draining to it and what other solutions are delivered above it, you may have to take that to contaminated land. As they do, the local authorities, they're meant to be gully pits, which are debate whether they're a source of pollution or actually, preventing pollution. But same with that should all be sucked out and taken to contaminated land.
What sort of contribution can trees make? And if they can make a contribution, does it matter what sort of tree?
So a tree by itself can do something, and it depends what sort of pollution we are talking about. So if you're talking about CSOs, they can slow down the rain and help it. If you're talking about road runoff pollution, they probably won't do too much unless they're designed in such a way, and you do get a sustainable drainage system called a tree pit, which is where all the surface water off the road goes into a pit below the tree, sort of supplies water to the roots of the tree, but also allows that water to percolate into the ground. So that can treat road runoff pollution, and it will be a lot better at storing water, so thereby preventing combined sewer overflows.
I've got a question about incentives. So infrastructure like sewers is built around peak demand, and all these SUDS and things like that basically lower the peak demand by spreading the events over time. I just wondered how to connect the dots there, because you mentioned that Coca-Cola shouldn't be paying for Thames Water's problems, but in a way they are if they're using money to delay the requirement for Thames Water to upgrade large sewer flows.
I think it's a really interesting line of thinking, and there's a lot of there's a movement. In fact, you should have taken this because you're involved in finding sources of income from commercial entities that to pay for environmental outcomes. And you know, you've talked about your the abstraction market, essentially the water quantity market, and we need the same around nutrient trading. We need the same. Someone mentioned insurance. That's a really good point. The challenges are around when it's collective ownership to identify who the payers are in this, you know, for collective benefit. I've just presented another problem to you, haven't I? Do you want to provide the solutions? Sorry, yeah, just to finish up the thought that there's a move now as well, and we're talking about it today, you know, tonight, water companies thinking about catchment-based interventions to achieve the outcomes that you described, you know, reducing peak flows. That's exactly the stuff of tonight's talk. But I think, you know, we can't allow that to be a distraction from the need to fix, to update, to future-proof, all those things. Does that answer your question?
I'll try and add a bit to that. Thank you, Joe, because it was a good answer. I think why I like sustainable drainage systems, wetlands, is because they provide multiple benefits, you know, and we talked about some of them: flood risk, sewer capacity, water quality. And I'm going to use a horrible term, blended finance approach, which basically means whoever benefits from those, you know, assets or the, you know, what these solutions deliver should pay for it. So, you know, whether it's the Environment Agency or the government are seeing that homes are being protected from flooding, they should put money in. If we can deliver water quality improvements, which helps offset companies, private companies, you know, impact upon the environment, we should do that. And so we need to find a way to put these sources all together. Why I say about Thames Water is, you know, where I want to see them coming forward is to be more proactive and more of a leader in terms of delivering solutions and funding those and being an instigator of these. And that's some of the issues I have, you know, with them. I won't go into the rest. But yeah, so that really we need to be bringing all of these different organisations and all of the multi-benefits and getting each benefactor to pay their fair share of it. And then what if we can already put that together, we won't be talking about a wetland here and there or a sustainable drainage system, a rain garden in another place. We'll see it spread throughout London, Thames Basin, etc.
Can I just come back on one thing? Just just to pick up the point that Alice made. Schedule 3. Does everyone know about Schedule 3? Hands up if you know about Schedule 3. Good. Do you want to explain it? No. So in 2010 there was the Flood and Water Act that was brought into the UK, and Wales adopted this part of it, Schedule 3, which obliges developers to build SUDS as part of developments. You know, why shouldn't they? This is the infrastructure that they should deliver as part of their whole development. So I think it's important to know about Schedule 3. In January last year, the government reviewed it and said, oh, maybe we should bring in Schedule 3 because it's working so well in Wales. And then nothing's happened. Nothing's happened. So think of Schedule 3 when you go to the ballot box.
Hi, so I've studied green stormwater infrastructure, as I call it, or SUDS in this context in America. And it's often done by city governments rather than private organizations. So there's a lot of different challenges there. And one of the challenges we uncovered is the long-term maintenance of these sites, because there's a lot of upfront funding and excitement about it, but then who's weeding the rain garden in 10 years sort of thing. And so would just wonder how you guys have approached that in your private funding infrastructure. And then also when you think about the companies who are engaging in the voluntary offset market, I'm interested if they're doing that at a time scale or if it's just at that upfront.
So there's a bit there. So maintenance is a huge issue within the UK with any of these systems. It's probably the biggest issue preventing SUDS being implemented at scale at the moment. You know, the real leading local authorities we work with now, because of budget cuts, they're getting quite a lot of pushback, i.e. how is maintenance going to be funded? The good thing I've sort of seen recently within the voluntary market is they will include, you know, money, or we can include money for 10 years worth of maintenance to ensure that they continue performing. So that's actually the first time I've sort of seen maintenance being funded. The one thing I would also say with this is if you look at a housing company called Peabody and what they are doing down in Thamesmead, they have really started to begin to, and this is more wider in terms of green spaces, but they're doing huge amounts in terms of green infrastructure improvements in Thamesmead, and they are training up and developing their staff and getting them, you know, accredited courses with Capel Manor so that they can maintain the assets which they are delivering. And that's something that, you know, there is a big skills gap in the water sector, and I include that from NGOs to the regulatory authorities to, you know, the water companies. You know, maintenance comes into that. We need to be training our staff, training our communities, our people, so that they can maintain more biodiverse and better spaces. And that's the first time I've really seen it being addressed in my life. Alice probably knows more about it.
Yeah, this is again about, you mentioned schedule 3, of which I found out now. And I'm just asking about how to get developers to possibly not only invest in what in schemes like this, but also to look at designs. I live near, not far from Tottenham Hill. It's growing up as a new build town. And I don't think there is much of an inch of green left. Everything is paved over. There are some tiny tree pits with tiny trees. It looks like an architectural model become real. It's so artificial. I mean, I'm thinking, can these companies really be pressurized to either avoid these kind of designs, because it doesn't in a way make a lot of sense that I'm letting my front garden go to grass and that's great, it's fine, but then you have these massive developments that are all paved over. Is there any legislation that can at least prevent these developments to become so incredibly paved over and have nothing left?
Well, there are a lot of ways of doing that, and mostly that would be in planning policy, so that when you have a big development, there's a very big negotiation. And usually when they want money to be spent, they do have what's called Section 106 money, and that can be used to create wetlands. Probably a lot of Section 106 money has come from Enfield Council. So they can also build effectively for blue roofs or green roofs to absorb water. They can take the water that's coming off down the drain pipes from the roofs. They can fit homes with, you know, water efficient So there's a lot that can be done. It's got to be done via planning policy and building regulations. And it'll have to happen basically, or we're going to be underwater. I don't think we've really kind of pushed the sense of urgency, have we? We'll kind of spend our whole time thinking about it. But, you know, I think that 2025, we're actually running out of sewage capacity at Beckton, which covers most of London, or was it across? Anyway, it's like, you know, this isn't a thing that would be nice to do. We're going to be, you know, have no clean water very soon if we don't actually deal with this. So yeah, I think those things we'll start to see more and more of that, the way that things are built. And
so Schedule 3, if that's brought in, it will involve the local authority having a SUDS approval body. So they will then approve the water management on the site. The GLA have also brought in a criteria called the urban greening factor, which is probably really good for just delivering better green infrastructure outside water on any development. So there, you know, if Schedule 3 is brought in, that would be great. Also, urban greening factor is a really good move, because BNG, biodiversity net gain, isn't going to work that well for green infrastructure in terms of what you're talking about in London.
I've got a question about leadership. So in the two sense, we've heard quite a lot about like various different things that people aren't doing who are our leaders, and various things that we can do as free agents. The first thing I'd like to say is basically that we're probably all here very aware of like the severity of the situation, and we probably all know a lot of people who couldn't give a toss, and who it's really hard to convince them of the severity. And when there's things that we can be doing, like being careful of what we do with our front gardens. When we work in manufacturing industries, I'm a brewer, I'm used to a lot of waste going down the drain. And I'm also used to like not being very successful when communicating things like this to them. So my first question is, what should we do? How can we ignite hope in people that have lost hope or don't seem to be very interested? And second part is, who should we be voting for in terms of water policy? Thank you.
Can we take bets?
well, I'm not allowed to be political, obviously, so I can't possibly say anything about that. But sorry, now I've forgotten more. Leadership. But it is political. Of course it's political. The whole of the environment is political. If, you know, if we want to reach net carbon, if we want to breathe clean air, if we want to have clean water, all of it is just about politics. So we live in a democracy. That means that we have to have politicians and parties who understand what the problem is. And then they need to be effective at managing the solution. And we all act as lobbyists, I suppose, to try to push them to come up with the right answers. But why is that so difficult? It's a good question, you know. It's like I do a lot of work on transport, and the minute that you try to change anything about how somebody drives their car, there is massive culture wars goes on, and you know, you find it's just staggering how hard it is to make one little change. And yet we hit crisis point. So we hit COVID and we can do anything we want immediately. So there is an argument in politics which says that you have to hit crisis point before, but for me, it's just about, well, what does crisis look like in the environmental world? What does it look like? What do we have to deal with first? Nothing about people dying from air pollution seems to drive change. Don't seem to care. That doesn't seem to bother people. The fact that thousands of people killed on the roads every year doesn't seem to bother anyone. You know? So what carbon is so, you know, carbon and climate change is so kind of abstract from the immediate that's not kind of able to drive change. So clean water, the fact that we don't have any might actually be the one thing that enables us to drive some change quickly, but it's not easy. You've just got to keep at it. You've got to keep going, and you've got to make it clear. So one of the reasons that we're here today with this kind of sponge city idea is because, you know, I firmly believe that if I didn't know what I know a year ago, then there've got to be a lot of people out there who don't have enough of the detail to really, you know, be able to make informed debate, talk to other people about it, spread the word, and so forth. And I do, and although, you know, we talk about Fergal Sharkey, but you give me a face. But you know, this stuff is important. Otherwise, nobody would know about it. So I don't know, it's a really long way of answering your question, but, you know, privatise water now. Sorry, nationalise, what am I talking about? Nationalise the water, nationalise Thames Water, is what I'd do. But stop throwing money at, you know, at shareholders. But, you know, how are we going to make that happen?
Can I just, about community leadership? So we work as NGOs. I mean, we have the privilege. I mean, London has its massive challenges, which you just illustrated. But we also have the privilege of working with many very dedicated local people who, through just patience, time, tenacity, he's one of them, I think. He's looking away. There's a few more here as well. Friends of groups, slowly but surely spreading the word, doing the right thing, showing your front garden as an example of how you can park your car there, but also make it porous. I just think that that's proper democracy, right? And that's what I think gives us hope. And certainly in my job, it's such a privilege. You know, all those people that go out, survey rivers, it's grim. You know, they're looking for sewage fungus, but they come every year. You know, we've got hundreds of people join us every year to do that sort of thing. So those are important, and I think I think Alice, you illustrated why we can't wait sometimes for leaders, but we can set an example locally and bring people along with us.
Yes, I wonder if there are any examples of developers harvesting water. It seems to me if rainwater is going to be, if water is going to become scarce, it's going to hit where I live, because you look at the skyline and all you can see is cranes and blocks going up. So I'm concerned about, will there be enough water, and is anybody harvesting it for things like flushing toilets?
Not in the UK, but it is done elsewhere. I believe Anglian Water are doing quite a big push on trying to get that in. And, you know, I've had some starting conversations, but it's very authority led as opposed to developers. Developers will only do what you regulate them to do. You know, they're not, you might have the odd, you know, person who does it as a home build or as a proof of concept project, but, you know, you're not going to get them building, you know, houses at scale without that sort of real regulatory approach.
Oh God, sorry. It's more a statement, really. I think you've enlightened me tonight with that map that you showed, where it showed how particular drains could be diverted to certain parks. I thought that was enlightening. I work for Groundwork London. We do things at quite large scale, like Clever Cities and Thamesmead, but actually we do a lot in the community, and we work with a lot of friends of groups, and they apply for funding and things like that. And actually that was enlightening, because I've never known how to join the dots. You know, it's really hard in social housing settings. Downpipes don't go down into shared areas, they go into kind of individual gardens. So actually you've just joined the dots for me tonight. So I just want to say thanks.
What I would say to that is also get involved in your local catchment partnership. You know, there's a lot of knowledge, and I think we've got about 11 catchment partnerships in London, hosted by a whole range of organisations who are really trying to drive action. So, you know, if you're involved in anywhere, green spaces near a river, speak to your catchment host, and there's bits on our website, Southeast Rivers Trust, Crane Valley Partnership. So there's places you can go, speak with people you can speak to. I think you had a question too.
I'm wondering for the map you just showed about I guess the last one got some cheats. I'm wondering for the map in John, your presentation showing the available SUDS solutions is based on what information are these available SUDS solutions generated, and does that reflect more of a status quo or a future trend? And also, will it be have access to the public? Thanks.
So it's all publicly available. I think you should have access to my presentation.
So I've put the presentations on the website. So if you look at CPRE London and just search CPRE London and Sponge City, you should find the page that I've updated. I updated it today, so it should have that date on it, and the 3 presentations are on that.
It was developed by a very clever lady called Professor Leanne Lundy at Middlesex University, and we took her method and then applied it, which was very painful, but it should make it simple now.
Just for that. Thank you so much. Our speakers have been fantastic tonight. I'm sure everybody would like to show their appreciation.